Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm your host, Usha Kumar. I have with me today a wonderful guest, Jara Burnett. She is the Director of League Services at the League of Women Voters. And she has been around the state, around the country a lot, trying to set up these organizations and get them all going again after a long time of being very dormant, I would say. But we are getting close to an election where we are going to have a woman candidate for president in this country. And I think it's important for all of us to remember a time when women could not vote in this country. And they had to fight and fight a lot and fight for a long time before they did get that privilege. And so it's also important for us as women citizens here in this country to bear our responsibility and try to learn how the political process works and learn that it's our responsibility to elect the right people to our government. So please join me in welcoming Jara. Jara, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Usha. What a nice thing to do. I love to talk about the fight that women have conducted for, would you believe, 72 years before women could finally get the vote. It all started way back in 1848 in Seneca Falls, which is a place in upstate New York. And in 1848, a group of people decided that it was time to be more enlightened than they had been before. And
how so?
Well, the pioneering time has come and gone. So now in 1848, there's a lot of political upheaval happening in Europe, and some of it, I guess, came into the United States too. People had a little bit more leisure time, and they could occupy themselves with more, not just subsistence. They could think of social issues and all of that. So in 1848, a group of people said that it was time to end slavery and to enfranchise women. Not just vote, but to give women the same privileges as males. Many people do
So
not.
at that time, who had the privilege to vote?
Well,
Was it just all the men, or was it people that were only landlords?
that's exactly all of it. Originally, when the country became a country, the right to vote was a white male property owner over 21 years.
I see.
Over the years, by 1848, I think there were certain males, even though they weren't property owners, could vote under special circumstances, but no women.
I see.
Under no circumstance. Well, so there was this wonderful pronouncement. They were going to work to make life fairer in the United States, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. It wasn't until 1870 that Carrie Chapman Catt, who is one of the very big names in the fight for women's suffrage, she organized a group that was called National Women's Suffrage Group. And their idea was that they were going to fight for women's suffrage via an amendment to the Constitution, a congressional amendment to the Constitution, which eventually would have had to be ratified by two-thirds. By the states, two-thirds of the states.
Okay.
Well, there was a second group that felt this was not the right way. Lucy Stone was the leader of the other group, and they became American Association of Women's Suffrage.
Okay.
And they believed that the way to do it would be to go to the various state legislatures and have them enact put it in their constitution, enact a law that would allow women to vote. Well, once again, not a whole lot happened. They were pursuing their two ways. Actually,
by this time, wasn't there another movement that did bring in some amendments?
Oh, there have been amendments.
To add more people that can vote.
There have been amendments.
The 14th and the 15th Amendment,
the 14th and the 15th, yes. The 14th Amendment actually allowed black people, Negroes as they were then called, to be counted as full-fledged citizens. Up until then,
I see.
a black person, a Negro person, when they did the census, counted only as 2/3 of a person.
Oh, I see.
There you go.
Okay. So now, with that, they were counted as a full person, as
yes,
a full citizen.
But
okay.
It also gave them theoretically the right to vote, but many of the states were vehemently opposed.
Okay.
And it wasn't until the 15th Amendment that it became the law of the land.
I see.
That they did have the right to vote. Well, it was a wonderful thing, but in practice they still didn't have the right to vote. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in 1880s, the new states started being admitted to the Union.
So even though citizens could vote, and the citizens could be from other racial groups,
they had the right to vote, not the Indians, not American Indians, only the black people, only the black people. But in practice, they still couldn't vote because a lot of barriers were thrown so that they couldn't vote.
If they're not free?
Well, or
were they supposed to be free by then?
At that time, they were already emancipated. Nevertheless, there were, especially in many of the southern states, and frankly, later on, even in the northern states, that prided themselves of being very enlightened. What happened is, for instance, there would be poll taxes. Most of those black people could not afford to pay a poll tax. There would be literacy tests, so that very, very, very few people voted. But back to women. The women were very disappointed that nothing happened.
So the women were not even considered citizens?
The women were citizens, but they didn't have too many rights. A married woman could sign no contract.
I see.
A married woman, if the husband decided to remove her children from her care, had no recourse. So it wasn't just a matter of voting, it was also a matter of full citizenship. Okay. And finally, the two organizations merged in 1890, and they decided that they really needed a little bit more publicity, they needed to do a little bit more. Up until then, the women were behaving like ladies. They were very ladylike, and they did not get very far at all. Now, back in the western part of the United States, as they were admitting new states to the Union, Colorado and Wyoming gave women the vote. Now, that sounds very enlightened, and it was, but there was also a little bit of self-interest in it. Because in order to be admitted to the Union, you had to have a certain number of people, voting people.
I see.
And they were kind of short of population. So in order to make the threshold,
I see.
They decided to give the women the vote.
I was quite surprised that when it did finally happen in 1919 and in 1920, I saw Wyoming right at the top of having supported this, and I was quite surprised to see them on the list like that.
And you know what?
And then I saw that Connecticut had not even signed it by that time.
Never voted for it. We had a very conservative type of legislature and governor, and they were vehemently opposed to it. What was the most violent part of the movement happened just before First World War. Alice Paul, whose name might be familiar to some people, had been in England. She was a Quaker young woman, went to England and saw what the suffragettes, they were called suffragettes in England and suffragists in the United States, you figure why. And she decided that everybody was entirely too meek, that the leadership of the women's movement were just too patient. So she organized a great deal of marches. She organized public demonstrations. Women became far more outspoken about it. The problem happened in 1914. That was a big question mark for many of the women, because once the United States was at war, the question was it anti-patriotic if you still pushed for women's suffrage when the country was at war? And that is when most of the violence against women occurred. The group, for instance, picketed the White House. They were standing right outside of the gates to the White House, carrying placards, saying all sorts of things like, "Dear Mr. Wilson, when?" and so forth. And they were often attacked by mostly males who felt this was unpatriotic. Eventually, about over 400 women were jailed.
I see.
And under pretty ugly conditions. Finally, the situation became so awful because there was a large group of women who were jailed just outside of Washington, D.C. in a workhouse where they were made to do manual labor with absolutely no decent food or anything like that. And a bunch of them went on a hunger strike.
Yeah, and I think it's very important for young women now
to know
over here to know about this, all the hardships that women faced before in order to get them the privilege, which they don't even seem to appreciate.
It's so natural that you have the right to vote. They don't think about that. So it wasn't until the wife of one of the congressmen who had joined the cause was in jail, and he was quite upset with how she was treated, and Alice Paul went on a hunger strike, and they force-fed her and all of that, and it became a cause célèbre. So President Wilson finally agreed that he would send the text of the 19th Amendment to Congress, and there it passed by one vote.
By one vote.
Yeah.
That's really amazing, because if that hadn't happened, who knows whether even today we'd have
exactly. Who knows where we would be?
Yeah.
So, after the 1919, when the amendment passed Congress, 2/3 of the states have to ratify, and Tennessee was the 36th state that ratified.
Yes.
And as you mentioned earlier, Connecticut never did.
Yeah. But they did after the fact.
Once it became the law of the land.
Yeah,
it became the law of the land. But what was so interesting about the leadership is that the women who have gained a lot of political experience decided that it would, after this 72-year-old fight, they did not want women to get the right to vote, and kind of wasted by not knowing, by copying their husbands, voting who the husbands
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
Yes, go ahead.
Even now, when I work the polls, sometimes helping people, and I would make these phone calls, and a lot of times some of the women had no idea who they were going to vote for, and they were just going to vote along with their family or their husbands. And I'm appalled at that kind of a situation, because there is no excuse for them to not know what's happening and who is running and all the background.
I could not agree with you more. In this day and age, we spent the last political campaign that we've had we spent upward of $1 billion on
Educating the
well,
people?
on candidates, if I'm going to call it propaganda, that sounds a little, on candidates trying to sway the voters to wait for them. A lot of it is negative advertising.
Yes.
A lot of it is stuff, but you must know when you watch television prior to an election, you cannot have 5 minutes
Yeah.
that you do not see. So in many ways, I don't know why people aren't informed.
And wasn't your organization involved in bringing debates
Yes.
at one time?
Yes, we
So what
were.
happened to that process?
Well, the process was, well, first of all, let me go back.
Okay,
just
we are
one
going to
second.
the little history.
Yes,
Okay.
1 second. When those ladies who gained a lot of experience decided that there were also a lot of issues that they were interested in. So they decided that they would form this League of Women Voters, and the League of Women Voters would have 2 purposes. One of them was strictly educational, which would be providing non-partisan information on candidates. Never endorse a candidate. Get as much information to the public as you possibly can. But that there would be the other arm where they would influence public policy. So the League ever since then has had 2 arms. One that educates, studies, makes decisions which solution is acceptable to our members. The other one lobbies. And we do a lot of lobbying on that.
On issues.
On issues that we have studied.
And bringing information about candidates
Yes,
to the
yes.
public.
So
I think
the
that's
2
all
roles.
there should be. I mean, and we can take out all of the unwanted money in politics and
It
elections.
would be very nice. Unfortunately, the way things are happening, it's not happening that way.
Yeah.
So back probably, let me think how far back. I think probably in the late 50s, when television was still fairly new, they were going to have debates, presidential debates on television, and the League was organizing them. A total of 3 election cycles the League organized the debates. But as television grew more mature, the candidates started seeing that you could lose an election if you didn't look good on television. You know the famous Nixon 5 o'clock shadow that they were talking about. So they started posing more and more conditions on what they wanted. They also didn't want any difficult questions. They wanted everything. You know, they wanted the candidates only in the best lights that could be provided for them, best light, and they wanted them to only be asked questions that made them look good. So ultimately, I think it was in 1968 that the League said, this is not what we're going to do. If we cannot have hard-hitting questions, we're just not going to do it.
I think they should still do that.
Well, do you know how much it costs to put a presidential debate on?
No, how much does it cost?
It's several $1 million.
I see.
And we don't have that kind of money. Because there is now a presidential commission, presidential debate commission, that raises funds, and so that they can pay the television
the press
people.
seems to have these debates, like media has some debates
well, there are
scheduled.
there are some media debates. The candidates want maximum exposure and maximum control, and that also makes it a little difficult. In my view, the Presidential Debate Commission isn't tough enough with the candidates.
Yes, definitely.
But we don't do presidential, but we do other debates, and a lot of them.
See, our half hour goes by very quickly, as I mentioned to you.
And I talk a lot.
So we only have about 8 minutes or something left, 8 or 7 minutes. And I want to be able to at least give a little more information about your organization itself.
Okay.
And how it's relevant still today, and why it should be picked up and grown at this point. Because in Connecticut, I've lived here a long time. I never even knew that there was a League of Women Voters here in Danbury area.
There was a very thriving chapter in the Danbury area, but because we're all volunteers, nobody's paid, we're all doing whatever needs to be done. Organize the debates, have publications like this, that, we gather information and all of that. Register voters, study issues. People sometimes get tired, and that is what unfortunately happened in Danbury. The organization that...
You mean you don't get enough volunteers to help?
Not always. Not always. Nowadays, especially, everybody is very busy, and it does make it... people just get tired, and so the chapter voted to dissolve itself. But interestingly enough, as the chapter dissolved, they were having difficulty getting volunteers and members. But as the chapter dissolved, people said, what's the matter? Where's the league? We want the league.
I see.
So my state organization, we're organized on 3 levels, national, state, and local. I'm part of the state. So we at the state have said, all right, let's see what we can do to get Danbury back on track. Last November, not a year ago, because we just had, it was last October, exactly,
Okay.
Last October we organized a debate in the congressional district, 5th congressional district, and we had full house. It was the Portuguese Cultural Center, who were our co-sponsors, and we had an hour debate, which I think was covered by your channel, as a news channel, I believe, Channel 23, covered it, and we had some really pretty interesting, it was interesting to see the difference between the 2 candidates, which is what we always like to show. We also did voter registration before the debate, and so now we're trying very hard to interest people in a League of Women Voters, because we have another election coming.
I know, a big one coming next year. And,
but we want...
And a smaller local one coming up this year.
Exactly, and interestingly enough, I think it's so important to vote in the local election, because that is really where your vote counts the most. Because, you're one of 80 million people voting for the president. You are one of 3 million voting for the governor of Connecticut. But you're probably one out of 50,000 voting in Danbury for the mayor.
Definitely. Your organization itself, does it combine all of these little units when it comes to lobbying at the federal level?
Yes. And it's a very complicated process. I'll go over it quickly. We only lobby on issues that we have studied and where we had member agreement on every levels, national, state, and local. So we have to have studied it, and the membership decided they support this position. National organization lobbies on the national level, though we are invited occasionally when there is a big thing. Like right now, the question is with several states abridging the voting times in Florida, in Georgia, in Texas.
Early voting,
making that shorter and shorter and shorter. So we are invited to write letters to our senators, even though it normally would be a state and national issue. We do a lot of lobbying on the state level, a lot of lobbying.
But you're saying there is no money even for debates, presidential debates, so we don't have the money for the lobbying as much as private corporations do.
We're volunteers. We lobby.
So here there's no money, it's all volunteers.
It's all volunteers.
And that's how it should be, I think.
I think so too. Now on the national level, because
we only have a couple minutes left.
So you can
go ahead and
No, on the national level, there are some people in the office because they have responsibilities of maintaining the membership base, doing administrative stuff. But on the state level, all the lobbying is done by volunteers.
I see.
And we have something called the 10-minute activist, which might be of interest to some of your listeners. If you're passionate about a topic, let's just say transportation, you can be in touch with our office and get yourself on a transportation supporter list. And when something comes up in the in Hartford on transportation where we feel that a push from the grassroots would be helpful, an email goes out to you explaining the issue and asking you to contact your senator or your member of the House.
How will they contact you or the group here in Danbury?
All right, I think that the group in Danbury is probably best contacted through our state office, and the number is 203-288-7996.
Okay.
And the office is open from 9:30 in the morning.
And they'll be able to find this number if they go online?
Yes.
And look for League of Women Voters in Connecticut.
We are at LWVCT. We are LWVCT at lwvct.org.
I see.
So a lot of initials, a lot of letters.
That's okay. They'll be able to find it.
Yes.
So don't go away. We're going to shoot a couple more shows because we have a lot to discuss about the education, the issues, and people's responsibility and how they can help with this and how they can participate in this process.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for coming, Jara. Hey, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please tune in again next week and probably even the following week because Jara and I have a lot to discuss about this League of Women Voters where all of you can participate. Actually, nowadays you don't even have to be a woman to be part of this.
That's right.
Even if you're a man, you can still participate and be part of this group. So thank you all for watching. Please tune in again next week. Until next time, goodbye.